Classes in session. Hey, welcome to Unlearn 16 Classes in Session. Guys, today I'm going to jump into Oliver Anthony's Rich Men North of Richmond. First of all, it's a mouthful, but it really does in the way that the lyrics play out. It's quite beautiful. It's an excellent sort of sentence to throw in there. It really does roll off the tongue. But I want to talk about this song because I listened to it. It came right after the Aldine song, and everybody, I mean, that video and that everything was so heavy-handed about that song and so clearly problematic and directed and what a lot of people would see and the way that he handled it and his bravado and all of that stuff. I'm going to put that over here because I talked about that song somewhere else. But I've had a lot of people say, Joe, you got to listen to Oliver Anthony's song. And I wanted to do it, and I have to say this right off the hop. I'm doing this with little to no, not absolutely none, because it's impossible in these days to actually have an opinion without actually hearing something of what somebody else said. I tried not to research it. I tried not to delve into it as much as of just what I think, not what other people thinks, not what the Guardian said or the Atlantic or friggin' Rolling Stone's already written about this song, right? Just me. Okay. And I want to go through it because I feel as though, just like everything in this world, there are some things that are endearing. There are some things that touch a very particular point and are incredibly poignant about our, let's say, current reality and the human condition of right now. He's obviously singing about the United States, but we can extrapolate and we can expand this to different places. And there's some of the stuff that when I really listened, and I went, I don't know if I love that metaphor. I don't know if I love what he's trying to say there. And that's okay. I am not advocating I have to agree with anybody, but maybe what we should stop advocating is something as holistically amazing, a perfect, an anthem, or garbage and eliminate it. Because I'll tell you one thing, Oliver Anthony's endearing. His voice, his very, like the way that he presents himself, the way that he speaks, he is seemingly, from what I've seen so far, a very lovely, down to earth, from Richmond, Virginia kind of guy, and has this very folksy throwback voice, that makes you believe him, that makes you hear what he's saying in sort of, in my opinion, a very authentic way. And I think that's what's striking a chord for a lot of people. Even if when I jump into the lyrics, I'm like, but what about this lyric? And even the title, Richmond, North of Richmond. I mean, that's the title of the song has weight and history. And I don't know, again, because I haven't spoken to him, nor have I heard him really do a lot of press about this. I don't know what he's really trying to say. I am going to give you my interpretation of how it can come across, and we'll go from there. So we're going to go by section for section. I'm not going to play the song. You guys have heard the song. You guys can go listen to the song on your own. But again, let me start. Endearing. I kind of, you root for this guy, you want him to do well. He's turned down all of this money, so you have this vibe about him, although it's sort of counterintuitive to his song. You're turning down money, do something cool with the money. But I get it, turning down major establishment. But I also find something interestingly problematic about that. But nonetheless, let's talk about the lyrics. So we'll go through the first, we'll go through line by line. I've been selling my soul, working all day, overtime hours for bullshit pay. So I can sit out here and waste my life away, drag back home and down my troubles away. So lots of people think and believe and feel exactly that way about what job they're doing, about how they're being taken advantage of the system that they're in, of how that company and that sort of our system of economics is taking advantage of what they do. And it sort of can throw you into a tailspin of losing meaning for life and losing meaning for that job and your purpose and your place and your value. All of that, I'm with. All of that, I'm with. And the interesting part about this song and the funny part about the conservatives loving it, which by the way is the initial reason that I'm like, well, now I don't want to like it because they like it. So I admit my bias there. But what this song is really talking about, if you really stripped it all away, and it's hilarious to me, it's a Marxist song. It is. It's a song about broken capitalism. It's a song about how extremely wealthy elite, because you can talk, it doesn't matter what shape, size they come in, garnering and gathering that much wealth for one individual gives them a level of power and control that the rest of us just don't have. And then we become kind of puppets or victims of that. So the funny part about it is, the funny part about sort of, in my opinion, the main theme of the entire thing is this, is that the average employee in the United States that's working incredibly hard, that has been completely alienated from their own labor, alienated from the profits in the business that they add to and the value that they bring in. They're making a Marxist argument here. And what's clearly broken is the way in which we have put in place a capitalist economic ideology, taken the leashes off different economic corporations and different, multinational corporations and transnational corporations and corporations at the home and all of these things. And politics, because this is going to get political, right? Because the conservatives are going to love it, but it's going to get political. But politics becomes an extension thereof, right? When we say that politicians are being bought and sold for by corporations, why do corporations have that much money and that much control? How have we allowed them that much access to people? So we're saying people can be bought. Cool. That's an argument. Should we all have such incredibly, high morals? You never can be bought. Well, I don't know if that makes sense, because there's a lot of factors that go into politics and who gets elected and how they get to stay and who. Guys, money is the bottom line here, right? Why do you think politicians, they take donations, and not all politicians do this. I know you guys are going to list people like Katie Hobbs and going to say, but she never did. I get that. But there may be a cap to her level of success. Like a Bernie Sanders. Look, because at the end of the day, what these people are challenging is the system of capitalism. Nobody's saying, everybody should be communist. By the way, and just for a refresher, Marxism is a criticism. Marxism is a criticism, an economic ideological criticism of capitalism. It does not talk about, it does not advocate a particular version of communism, by the by. But that's neither here nor there, because nobody really wants to read it. But talking about how we get lost in this system, our humanity gets lost. Our humanity gets lost when we are working on a line, let's say in a manufacturing corporation, pressing holes in this particular widget, whatever the hell it happens to be, 8 hours a day, getting paid X amount. You never see your final product. You have no input. You have no control. You have nothing to do. And then the company itself making billions and you barely being able to make anything. And even worse than that, and I do believe this is true, even worse than that, it seems as though you have no purpose. Now, some people would say, oh, well, then you got to be an entrepreneur. Well, you know what? If everybody was an entrepreneur, who's going to do the jobs? Who? what kind of a world do we live in where everybody are just entrepreneurs? Nobody actually does the work in the factory, in the corporation. Nobody actually is punching the nobody's doing the stuff. And we have all these people just creating, constantly creating new things. Now what? Let's assume for a second we need to have a plethora, we need to have a wide scope of people in an economic system doing different things, service industry, manufacturing, educate, right? So not everybody can be the entrepreneur. So before you say, well, that's the answer, everybody should own their own shit. No, I don't agree with that. I think it's silly, but I do think humanity, people, need a connection and a purpose for what they do. And I think the assembly line, which I've argued a very long time ago, really stripped that away. And AI, here we go down another road of the exact same, even grander magnification. All right, next paragraph or whatever. Stanza. If only I was a poet. Okay, here we go. It's a damn shame what the world's gotten to for people like me and people like you. I'm with you so far. Okay, maybe. Wish I could just wake up and it not be true, but it is. Oh, it is. Okay. I still do not ally myself with the notion that it used to be better back when. This is giving me Make America Great Again vibes. And I'm not, please I'm not looking to divide and conquer on this. I'm just looking to talk about it's a nostalgia piece. I am not a big fan of nostalgia. I love it. Don't get me wrong. I love the Smurfs. I have a bunch of toys on my wall out there. I love talking about my childhood. But nostalgia in the sense of we should be running the world the way the world was ran, also problematic. Because with sort of technological advancements and stuff we've lost, we've also gained huge rights and momentum and education and access, right? So I'm not a big fan of look back, that was the cool thing back then. If only the days were yesterday. You see it always, and you see like, how'd you know where all the kids were at when you were playing when you were a kid while all the bikes were in front of the house, right? Great, sure, I get that. But but I mean, there was also great risk there. There was also great risk, and problem in the sense of a level of, let's say, neglect, and rampant freedom of kids and of neighborhoods, and a lot of bad things happen. Let's be honest. The 70s and 80s wasn't all rainbows and kittens. All right, here we go. Now, this is going through this this next part too. Again, I listen to him and he's endearing. I want to give him a hug. I do think he's being authentic. I don't feel as though it's intended to be a certain way that I don't necessarily like, but again, I got to talk about it in sort of just the way I perceive it. Next stanza. Living in the new world with an old soul. Listen, if you have an old soul to me, an old soul to me doesn't mean you live in an older, it doesn't mean you're living in the 20s. An old soul to me should mean you figured out more life, you have more empathy, you have more connection, you understand the world better, you can connect with people better. An old soul, the metaphor, is really tapping into your more of a higher level of intelligence. Nobody's looking to live back in the days where women couldn't vote or Jim Crow laws were in full force. That's not the old soul we're talking about here. An old soul for me says something more about your wisdom, your awareness, your connection, and your ability to understand the world as we live in it and adjust to new ideas and concepts and inclusivity and all of those kinds of things. But let's be honest, he's talking about, look, the world's gotten a little hard. I think this is what he's talking about. The world's gotten a little confusing for guys like me, for him, right? Meaning, there used to be clear sort of delineation of what who people were and how they were to act and what the interactions look like. And I feel as though, again, please, easy with the throwing of the stones, but I feel as though it's kind of like I'm just a good old boy. And again, I love you. I really do, Oliver. I mean, you're endearing, but I'm not a big fan of that concept. I don't think that has a lot of value. And the way that, in my opinion, you kind of double down on it, and I get it. The alliteration and the way this line works is perfect. So he could have just done it because it's perfect and he's from Richmond. But I don't think that's the case. These rich men north of Richmond. Now, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that Richmond, Virginia was the capital, was the center point of the Civil War for the South. You don't have to be a genius to understand the geographical symbolism of north of all the rich men north of Richmond, which would have all been the Union guys vying for unity, vying for like the United States, which I also think is hysterical because it's condemning what I think it is condemning the notion, which, by the way, I don't necessarily disagree with part of it. It's condemning the notion that the Civil War was fought in part by the South. Obviously, we have slavery, protecting that institution. They don't want their economic order, but they don't want the manufacturing districts of the North determining what their um, agricultural businesses and economy did in the South, right? Now, you can't disentwine, is that a word? Slavery from all that. You can't. But what I would also argue is, and I've said this many a time on many different podcasts, you also can't assume for a minute that the North were all about equality of African Americans when in actuality, when that war happened and when slavery was abolished, northern manufacturing districts it took advantage of the fact that they would pay African American men a quarter, 25% of what they pay the white guy standing right next to them. Let's not forget that. And also, there's this notion that the North, sort of a federalist state, the idea of a unified country and a national government, wanted more power to control the whole country, whereas the South just wanted unified states where individual states had a lot more power unto themselves, right? And that's the argument that goes back and forth. I don't mind that. I guess again I make space for it. However, are we really thinking that people in Richmond, that people of the South, that plantation owners weren't horrifically wealthy and weren't doing what they were doing to become massively wealthy on the backs of slave labor? Are We're not really making that argument. We're not really making that argument that anybody who believes in stronger state rights is somehow more equitable, does better things for their employees, takes care of their employees better, is a nicer capitalist, takes care of their people, gives them health care and adequate raises, and never takes advantage of their labor. Nobody's making that argument. Are they? Because this is where I start to get frustrated. Because if that's the argument you're making, it's absolutely asinine. Absolutely asinine. We can sit here and talk about incredible wealth, corporate wealth, the creation of billionaire after billionaire, and what they can do with that money, and how tax law and corporate law and all of the legislation that's passed down by the people they've gotten elected helps them first and helps them best. I'm with you. I'm all in. But that's not just north of Richmond. And using that as a template, you're creating yet another illusion that the good old boys of the South take care of each other better. and I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan with you there. Lord knows they just want to have total control, want to know what you think, want to know what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do. So they want total control. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, and this is where we're going to go back to who's looking for total control. How are they looking for it? How do we have a United States of America based on constitutional principles of freedom, liberty, and justice for all? Yet we still have such incredibly high levels of discrimination, incredibly high levels of things like police brutality, incredibly high levels of this kind of sort of aggressive level of capitalism, right? We can't say any of that. So, total control, sure. I think lots of people are looking for total control, but I actually believe that it's coming through more so from corporations and the broken sense of capitalism than it is coming from politics. If you want to fix the politics, you got to fix the capitalism. You want to fix the capitalism, well, that's a whole other story. And I promise you, that's just not north of Richmond. Because your dollar ain't shit and it's taxed to no end, funnily enough. Look, comparing the taxes in the United States to the taxes up here, I don't even understand how to have that conversation. What I do understand is this: you are the wealthiest nation in the world. And the fact that you don't have free healthcare, tax based healthcare for every single person is a travesty, is a human rights injustice, is disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Here's where I think some interesting shots were fired. I wish politicians would look out for minors, and not just minors on an island somewhere. Lord, we got folks in the street ain't got nothing to eat. And the obese milking welfare. Okay. It's like he comes with something interesting and then comes with a left hook of something I'm not in love with. Okay. We want to look out for, so this probably is in reference to, there's a lot of talk about what went on in that island. I'm not going to talk about him. I'm not going to talk about anything like that because we know that YouTube is not going to go down that road. So this one island and this one group of people, whatever happened, would I do people need to be held accountable for doing horrible things? Absolutely. But I think what he might be getting at, and here's where I find him interesting, he might be getting at the fact that there's a bunch of kids in the United States right now, bunch of the levels of child poverty, the levels of kids going without food, the levels of kids not getting educated, the levels of kids not having proper housing and proper clothing, and those, whether they be whatever child you're talking about, how do we not care that much, right? You have a lot of people talking about all sorts of anti abortion and pro life movements, but not about pro life in the sense of how do we enable these kids to have what they need to have a good start, regardless of the family in which they are born into? How do we protect kids? Because let's also focus on this. They like to talk about that. Conservatives like to talk about that island, but a vast majority of abuse, either physical, sexual, emotional, goes on inside the house. The call's coming from inside the house. It's family and close friends. So if that's the case, why are we spending so much time talking about the island? Again, I'm not negating the need to speak about it, and nothing about what's going on and how we're supposed to mitigate and protect kids from their own families, when the vast majority, statistically, the calls are coming from inside the house. Now, I don't like this whole welfare line. Number one, you start looking at how much tax dollar goes into welfare. If you eliminated it in its entirety, you'd barely notice. Now, in the States, I should have looked up the number before I did this. In Canada, if you looked at a pie graph of where our tax dollars go, welfare is such a thin line, it doesn't even get a color. All right? You want to talk about where a big chunk of money goes and actually have an interesting conversation? Go look at your defense budget. The defense budget of the United States is something like, it's like the next 20 countries combined. Let's go look at that. You want to look at where you're spending money inappropriately. And people have a lot of anger for welfare. This notion of people sitting at home and doing nothing while they're busting their ass. I get it, but I promise you, for the most part, that dynamic has been set up for low-income working people to hate low-income, poverty-stricken individuals on welfare with nothing. Why are these two people fighting? They're both very much, for the most part, victims of the same exact circumstance. Well, God, if you're 5'3" and you're 300 pounds, taxes not to pay for your bags of fudge rounds. Again, this is, in my opinion, sort of a misdirected, I think it's authentic, but a misdirected way of how we're taking care of all of these people when they don't deserve it, when they're not taking care of themselves. And again, I think you're missing some of the bigger sort of systemic and institutionalized issues, going back to your main idea, right? Oliver, going back to your main idea, that incredible sums of money are collected by a handful of few people who have all of the control. If you're going to lead with that, you have to understand that other people, regardless of how you perceive it, are still victims of the same structural breaches. Young men putting themselves 6 feet in the ground because all this damn country does is keep kicking on them down. Listen, I don't necessarily disagree with an idea that poverty begets poverty. It is a horrendous cycle. It is a horrendous cycle that's incredibly difficult to get out. And when you think you're not getting help anywhere, I think it's interesting that you condemn welfare on one hand and then talk about how the system kicks you down on another hand, because that doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense. What you could be advocating for here, and I'm all with you, why in the hell are you not funding your educational system the way you're funding, let's say, I don't know, your military? You want to attack poverty? You want to give them more? Well, then give them more. Then demand more. But it's almost as though you're talking about these taxes that you don't want to pay, but you know who's not paying them at the end of the day? Not the middle class. And we all know who's not paying them. Guys like Trump stood up there and said he's not. And he said he's not because the rules enable him to not pay his taxes. He said it out loud. And a big question is, why haven't we changed all of that? Change it now. Change it yesterday. Put rules on corporations. Right? And funnily enough, it's the same conservatives that are backing a song like this that would never change that system either. Lord, it's a damn shame what the world's gotten to for people like me and people like you. Listen, I like the fact that it seems as though there could be an attempt at some sort of unity, some sort of emotional connection between a lot of people. But I feel as though you lose the connection when you talk about Richmond, north of Richmond. When your fallback, when your main tenor, when your theme of your song is based in the Civil War, I don't know what else to do with that. I really don't. I would really love to talk to I know everybody in the world wants to talk to Oliver, but not to yell at him, not to do anything, but to have this conversation. Wouldn't this be the kind of conversation, not somebody saying, it's amazing, you're a god, it's an anthem, or it's garbage, I don't want to. How about have the conversation? Because at the end of the day, it's tapped into something, but I think it's about time we start tapping into reality, not the pretense and not the manufactured propaganda of reality that sells t-shirts and whatever. Because your dollar ain't shit. So he then he recites living in the new world with an old soul. These rich men north of Richmond, Lord knows they all just want to have total control, want to know what you think, want to know what you do. And they don't think you know, but I know that you do. Listen, and I'm going to end on this. There's an assumption that the mass population are full of idiots, are full of people that are going to be easily bought and sold, that are easily going to be distracted, much like the gladiators of Rome distracted the peasants from the fact they had no food. Give them entertainment and they will be distracted and they won't focus on what they should be focusing on, which is the corrupt Senate and government, right? But again, I want to say to you, it's not the government alone. It can't be. It can't be. If we are going to agree that it's the rich men, and I'll leave out the north of anything, if we're going to agree that the vast accumulation of wealth means a vast accumulation of unchecked power that allows them to take advantage, oppress, enslave, and abuse at their free will and giving you no rights whatsoever, then your war isn't with the conservatives or the Democrats. Your war is with your chosen oligarchs, with the men and women you've given billions to and allowed them to crown themselves ahead of you. And on that note, let me know what you think in the comments. I would love to continue this conversation, and I will see you next Tuesday. Same bat time, same bat channel. Dismissed.